So the video game industry is now bigger and more lucrative than it has ever been, registering global revenue upwards of $180 billion last year, far outpacing the profits generated by even Hollywood. But here's the thing, it is a very saturated market as well, and so you're going to have to do a lot to stand out, to make people want to buy your title and sit down and engage with it for between 30 to 100 hours. And therefore some publishers, developers and advertisers have gotten a little desperate when it's come to getting you to play their games. So let's take a look at them today. As I'm Jules, this is WhatCulture.com, and these are the 10 most desperate ways video games got you to play. Number 10. BULLSHOTS and misleading trailers. Perhaps the single most nefarious way that a desperate publisher can try and entice you to play their game is to straight up lie about it, or if we're going to be polite, which we're not, mislead is the term we're looking for. Now, bullshots is another term that stands for promotional images and trailers for a game which aren't in fact representative of its final release quality. In extreme cases, this might lead to something like the infamous Killzone 2 E3 2005 trailer, which was actually a target render intended for internal use only, but ended up being used to sell both the game and the power of the PS3, absolutely inaccurately of course. Ubisoft was also memorably dragged for their final versions of Watch Dogs and The Division, which were severely visually downgraded from their original gameplay demos. In rarer cases, developers might even straight up mislead the public about the content of their game, like Hello Games overpromising what No Man's Sky would offer straight out of the box. Whether the marketing has overstated a game's graphical or gameplay merits, the result is almost entirely the same: frustration from players who feel that they've been duped into spending cash on an experience different from the one that was advertised. Number 9. Being as edgy as humanly possible. Less deceitful, though arguably more annoying than bullshot culture, is the tendency for some developers to make a living by pandering to the surprisingly lucrative edgelord contingent of players. Now, this isn't to say that games shouldn't challenge social norms or ask provocative questions, but far too often developers will willfully create offensive and objectionable material simply to ride the wave of anti-PC fervor, because of course, as the saying goes, controversy creates cash. Perhaps the most outrageous example in recent years is Hatred, the game in which players control a mass-murdering misanthrope with the only goal being to slaughter as many innocent human beings as possible before he dies. Less a game created out of artistic inspiration than a lazy attempt to cash in on reactionary politics, Hatred was critically reviled and yet a considerable commercial success, so the ruse unfortunately worked. Number 8. Promising to make up for previous failures. And we're all sick and tired of corporate apologies from video game publishers who've basically attempted to swindle players and been categorically called out for it. And no company has more egregiously attempted to wipe the slate clean with an insincere promise to do better next time than EA with their treatment of the rebooted Star Wars Battlefront franchise. 2015's Battlefront was broadly praised for its graphics and gameplay, yet many were left colossally disappointed at the lack of release content, feeling that EA was basically milking the cash cow in a supremely half-assed way. But when it came time to marketing 2017's sequel, EA held their hands up and acknowledged that the original Battlefront was a relatively piecemeal experience on launch. They promised that Battlefront 2 would be considerably more content-rich, with a full narrative campaign and all DLC arriving free for players. Now, everyone makes mistakes for sure, but billion-dollar corporations aren't people, remember? They're money-motivated behemoths driven to see how much bad faith behavior they can get away with in the pursuit of colossal profits. And so it shouldn't have been surprising when EA's pre-release spiel about Battlefront 2 was frankly a load of toss. For starters, the campaign was a thoroughly naff, low-effort affair, and the multiplayer was derided for its slow progression system, which appeared to incentivize microtransactions above anything else. Now, EA did eventually work the game into better shape, but at this point, the damage had already been done. After all, as the saying goes, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. The response to Battlefront 2 was volatile enough that an expected third game never actually arrived, allegedly in part due to the high licensing costs involved with making Star Wars video games in the first place. Number 7. Nostalgia pandering. Nostalgia. It's one hell of a drug, right? Hollywood has perhaps proven more than any other entertainment medium the intoxicating power of dredging up people's childhoods and selling it back to them with a shiny new lick of paint. But gaming isn't that far behind either, with publishers well aware that raking over their legacy hits is much easier than actually coming up with a compelling new IP or ideas. Take Sonic Mania, a game which single-handedly reversed years and years of critical misfortune for the platformer series, and yet one which largely functioned as a reimagining of its earlier, better entries. By creating familiar but different remixes of the franchise's most iconic levels, Sega was able to pander to players' gravitation towards familiar comfort food, yet offer just enough new content to not be outright self-cribbing. The Pokemon franchise has perhaps been most criticized for dining out on its prior successes and failing to bring sufficient innovation, while the gaming industry's current obsession with remakes and remasters is further indicative of the commercial viability of the past. And we, as consumers, are certainly pretty much to blame here, because if it didn't work, they'd stop doing it. Now, this isn't to say that nostalgia can't be invoked in creative and interesting ways. I mean, take Final Fantasy VII Remake's interesting new take on the original story, but it often feels like a crutch that imagination-devoid developers lean on for easy profits. Number 6. Introducing goofy peripherals. Nothing screams desperation quite like a clunky peripheral being packaged with the latest entry into a hit video game franchise in an attempt to salvage flagging sales. There's no single example of this more egregious than Tony Hawk Ride, which released in 2009 as the skate series' best days were long behind it, and hoped to rekindle its connection with players en masse by releasing an accompanying plastic skateboard peripheral. In the era of Guitar Hero, it wasn't a terrible idea, even if it clearly was a Hail Mary pass to try and rescue a franchise on the commercial skids. The end results sadly confirmed the full extent of the desperation. The skateboard peripheral was a fiddly, unresponsive disaster, and releasing it to the tune of $120 simply hammered another nail in the series' coffin. External peripherals are admittedly a drastic enough step that few games even dare to implement them. I mean, the financial risk massively outweighs the potential for successful market innovation, which really only further confirms just how desperate Activision were on the Tony Hawk franchise. Ultimately, it won fans back not with silly, clunky plastic skateboards, but in a feat of nostalgic pandering, remaking the beloved first 2 games in the series. Number 5. Releasing things as free-to-play. There's perhaps no simpler way to entice somebody to play a video game than telling them that they don't need to pay a penny to do so. As such, the free-to-play movement has flourished in recent years, with publishers realizing the lucrative potential of luring players in with no upfront fee before charging them for all the extra stuff. Now, some games handle this much better than others. There are many great free-to-play games like Fortnite, Apex Legends, Warframe, and so on that don't design their gameplay in an excessively predatory or exploitative way. But there are so many more that do the absolute bare minimum to hook addiction-prone players and then attempt to milk them for every possible buck through pay-to-win mechanics, heavily incentivizing them to part with their real-world cash for a superior experience. And I mean, the most recent free-to-play disaster was Konami's eFootball 2022, which launched in an extremely compromised state, all while Konami busily shilled expensive premium DLC packs to anyone with a functioning pair of eyeballs. Publishers are well aware that most players won't fall for these tactics, so they're always after the whales, a rather dehumanizing term the industry uses for big money power users who will drop thousands of dollars on a game, possibly while hopelessly addicted to it. The desperation in the free-to-play market is palpable, because why bother making an artistic game that people will gladly shell out top dollar for when you can just exploit people's addictive tendencies for far less effort instead? Number 4. Hiring Hollywood talent. One of the easiest ways to give a video game press in the wider entertainment world is to hire a name actor to star in it, ideally lending both their voice and likeness to play a part. Now, this isn't to say that every celebrity role in a video game comes from a place of desperation. Rockstar has done a consistently good job of not letting A-lister voice artists hijack their GTA games, but GTA is also in the unique position of being among the most critically and commercially successful IPs on the bloody planet. Even with video games being taken more seriously by the wider world these days, for the most part, it's fair to say that Hollywood actors are hired to serve as the marketing face of a game and impress a greater sense of prestige upon it. Take Bruce Willis in Apocalypse, or more recently Keanu Reeves in Cyberpunk 2077. Hell, while Peter Dinklage didn't physically appear in Destiny, his voice was a major aspect of the game's marketing, even if it ironically ended up being removed at a later date. There's no denying that the presence of a beloved, well-known actor in a game will make just about anybody perk up and pay attention. Take Vin Diesel's bizarre involvement in the upcoming Ark 2, which has gotten considerably more eyes on that game than it would have otherwise had, no matter how it turns out. Number 3. That sweet, sweet loot. The mere whisper of the word loot is enough to make millions of players' ears prick up and pay attention, so ubiquitous is the presence of glistening things for them to hoover up after defeating an enemy. While finding currency or a new weapon and armor is nothing new for video games, we've come a long way from the comparatively quaint days of Diablo's loot hunt. Loot is commonplace amongst game genres these days, as publishers have discovered that few things get players' dopamine receptors firing up like a shiny purple pickup. While loot appears in many great games, some are so singularly focused around their collection that it feels tantamount to shining a laser pointer at a cat, and loot can be weaponized more nefariously in games that feature loot boxes, where players are encouraged to develop a gambler's mindset to RNG elements. This is particularly troubling when players are able to spend real money obtaining or unlocking more loot boxes. No loot-driven game can survive for long unless it offers up fun cosmetics and meaningful upgrades, but even so, these games are typically designed around manipulating human behavior first and foremost. They are industriously committed to maximizing player engagement in order to fill their coffers, and it doesn't get much more desperate than that when you're apparently making art. Number 2. Offering pre-order bonuses. Pre-order bonuses are an attempt by publishers to incentivize players throwing down money for a game before it's commercially available and typically before reviews have been released. Now, this isn't to say that all pre-order bonuses are inherently bad or maliciously inclined, but they do nevertheless feed into a wider culture of publishers trying to wring as much money from potential customers as possible before the game has even come to market. After all, once you've pre-ordered a game, you're probably not going to cancel it. And even if you've lost interest in the game, you might actually forget to cancel. The bonuses range from plastic tap figurines to multiplayer maps and in-game advantages, which won't be available to regular players for some time, if ever, and they're all conceived with the hope of parting you from your money as soon as damn possible. Some bonuses are more controversial than others, with the gameplay advantages proving especially divisive given their potential to create a divide between the players. Clearly, there's an exploitation of FOMO going on here as well, with publishers again manipulating human psychology for maximum financial gain. This is all because publishers know that consumers waiting for reviews is absolutely not in their best interest most of the time, and they will do anything they can to get your money early. And number 1, if all else fails, sex sells. The oldest adage of them all, and the one that will likely never not be true as long as humans remain sexual beings, is that sex sells, well, quite a lot. Gaming has certainly come a long way in recent years in moving away from the excessively sexualized marketing tactics of decades past, but it's still fair to say that many games are sold on the presence of scantily clad individuals, and let's be honest, usually they are a woman. To be blunt, let's just say that Dead or Alive Extreme games weren't shifting units because of their admittedly surprising robust volleyball gameplay. We all remember the blatant fan service in the earliest Tomb Raider games, and in a most extreme example, the cynically over-sexualized nudity-filled sports games like BMX XXX. More recently, Final Fantasy XV made side character Cindy a comically oversexed object of player lust, and Soul Calibur 6 offers up an Ivy so impractically clothed as to basically become a self-parody. Now, there's nothing inherently wrong with sexualized characters, male or female, though it is easy to become jaded when it feels like publishers are using that sex to desperately pander to your basest instincts and desires, when they consider you little more than a single-minded, horny teenager. It's easy to become suspicious that this fleshy smokescreen is here to distract from the fact that the game itself is actually lacking in the gameplay or story department. Yet, sex continues to sell games by the bucket load and probably always will, while the debate about what is sex positive and what's exploitation will forever rage on as well. And yes, before you say anything, we've noticed the thumbnail. We chose that to make a point, and that point is that sex, like I said, continues to sell. And there we go, my friends. Those were the 10 most desperate ways video games got you to play. I hope that you enjoyed that, and please let me know what you thought about it down in the comments section below. As always, I've been Jules. You can go follow me over on Twitter at RetroJ, or you can swing by Live and Let's Dice, where I do all of my streaming outside of work, and it'd be great to see you over there, my friend. But before I go, I just want to say one thing. If there is one thing that I am desperate for, it is that you treat yourself with love and respect, my friend, because you deserve all the best things in life, like love, happiness, and success, and do not let anything or anyone else tell you otherwise, alright? You're a massive ledge, and I want you to go out there and absolutely smash it today. I believe in ya. As always, I've been Jules. You have been awesome. Never forget that, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye.